The impression that something in an illustration is really big can be difficult to achieve, but much easier when you know some tricks and how to implement them. I've made many failed attempts at achieving a sense of impressive scale over years of learning, and didn't realize that the solutions I was looking for were actually pretty simple. Atmospheric perspective, the effect of further things having less contrast and more atmospheric color bleeding in than closer things, is something most people are aware of, but at the same time don't learn how to implement it very well. You can push this effect to make things seem really far away, making these far away things have a lightest and darkest value that are really close to each other. It can seem wrong to put such little contrast on anything, especially a focal point in the image, but you can still make something detailed without a wide range of contrast. If you want to add more atmospheric perspective to something that's already painted, you can make a new layer above it with the lighten blending mode and set it as a clipping mask. Color pick the dark area that you want to make lighter, and then bring the value up to however light you want the new darkest value to be, maybe also shifting the hue to be closer to the sky or background color. When you paint with this color, it will lighten all of the areas that are darker than the color you are painting with, leaving the lighter areas unaffected. There's also the darken blending mode that does the exact opposite, which could be useful if your scene is very dark and you want to darken the light areas of a distant object. And another thing you can try if you want to make the atmospheric perspective more extreme is duplicate your layer and fill the duplicate with the surrounding color, in this case blue. Lower the opacity to adjust how much the object blends into the atmosphere. Any of these methods are great for if you want to make it seem like something starts out closer and gradually becomes further away. Rather than cover the entire object, you can use a soft brush and paint just the furthest part. Maybe not as necessary as atmospheric perspective, but still effective, is using a low horizon line. This makes the viewer feel as if they are looking up to see this large thing, and as a result makes the viewer themselves feel small in comparison to it. The horizon can be almost touching the bottom of the frame, or even completely out of view. On top of this, 3-point perspective can really sell the feeling of looking up. This is when vertical lines point toward a shared vanishing point instead of being parallel. Keep in mind that using a low horizon line isn't a rule, and you don't need to use one every time. It's possible to make something look big that you are, say, looking down on, so long as you use other ways to indicate the scale. It's a common tendency to naturally make the main elements in an illustration roughly the same size. Sometimes making something look bigger is actually as simple as making everything else smaller. It sounds really obvious, but making, say, the main character in your composition super tiny can seem wrong. The scale difference of the important focal elements in a scene can be very dramatic, probably more than you think. Even if you have this character closer to the foreground area where it would be reasonable to have them be a somewhat large element in the composition, still making them smaller can generally have a positive effect and make the big thing look much bigger. If you add another figure right next to the big element, it creates a very clear sense of just how big it is. Something recognizable like a person or a tree next to it for scale works well because everyone is familiar with the scale of those things. But say you only want a person in the foreground area, and the scene exists on a sci-fi planet with no familiar landmarks like a tree or birds that could help suggest the scale. You can't get a very clear idea of how large these alien plants around the big subject are supposed to be. But if you add 1 or 2 plants next to the person, you can now imagine how big someone would be if they were in the distance, and so the sense of scale comes across properly. When putting details like grass and foliage around in a massive space, be very careful with how you do it. Individual blades of grass can easily look too big and mess with the sense of scale. Grass at a distance looks more like a grassy texture without individual visible blades. Brushes that have a lot of texture in them are good for this effect because they let you create the impression of a lot of tiny details. As an example, I can make this rock on the right look bigger by adding more finer, smaller details and texture. To make brushes like these yourself, add a slight value and or color jitter to them. Now I think it would be fun to end this video by taking some of my old work and fixing it. For this first one, I shrank the character in the scene, added a bit more atmosphere to the most distant rock formations, made the foreground darker to separate it more from the distant stuff, added more clouds to indicate the tallness of these trees and rocks, and then I also decided to just literally make the trees taller. Here's the before and after. On this second one, I brought down the horizon line and skewed the cathedral to give it this imposing 3-point perspective instead of just the tilted look I had before. I again decided to shrink down the smaller subject, this robot dog I put in the scene, and then made the cathedral look a bit more hazy. It had these really filter-like pronounced edges that I felt made it pop forward too much, so I painted those out. A couple trees in the distance help sell the scale better, and I finished this one by adding more snow, since there should be snow falling away in the distance that I didn't originally include. This is the comparison. I focused on detail for this last one, using my textury brushes to give the impression of a lot of tiny leaves, moss, and rock detail. The bigger things are, the more detail they will have, so more of it can often be, like in this case, what was really needed to sell the scale. I also added some birds to indicate the scale, and finally, some of the blue atmosphere seeping into the shadows of the statues. Here are some more videos of mine you might like. Thanks for watching!